the Florida JTS office for all of her technical help in putting the class together. And you're probably all real professionals at Zoom by now, but just remember, we are muting your microphones while Rabbi Berkowitz is doing the teaching. When he asks the questions or we pause for questions or comments, if you could raise your hand, either in real time or by using the chat box, I'll try and call on you. At that time, if you can unmute your microphone and talk, if you need my help with that, I can do it, but I think it's a little easier if you do it yourself and if you wait to be called on. We have some really robust participation here. We want to make sure everyone gets a chance to talk. Without further ado, Rabbi Berkowitz, welcome.
Erev Tov from Jerusalem. Good evening from Jerusalem. It's wonderful to see you all back in our virtual Beit Midrash. Thank you again for joining as we enter the action of the third chapter of Megillat Ruth, the Scroll of Ruth. Before I begin, as has become our tradition, I want to share with you a Dvar Torah, and then we will jump into our learning of the book of Ruth. And finally, as we close, as Carolyn mentioned, what I want to do is give you an update, give you a sense of what our ISO program is like for our rabbinical students here over the course of the year and what it's been like this past semester. So let's begin with Parshat Shlach Lecha. Ed, I trust this week I'm getting it right. It's a double header, as it were. Last week you had a bit of Shlach Lecha, and this week, once again, you'll have a bit of Shlach Lecha. You may or may not know that Israel and the diaspora are not on the same page. Not a shock, but this time of year, that's true with Kriyat Torah, with our Torah reading. And the reason for that is because of the holiday of Shavuot, right? You'll recall that with all of the Chagim, diaspora has 2 days of Chag, 2 days of festival. In Israel, we celebrate 1 day of festival. So because that was the case, in Israel, we went immediately from Shavuot into the regular Shabbat Torah reading, while you all in the diaspora continued with the holiday of Shavuot on Shabbat. So you had a special Torah reading for Shavuot, which put you all one Torah Parsha behind us. So we go on to the Torah reading of Korach, and you all stay on Shlach Lecha. Which is a great parsha. It's an infamous parsha in many ways because it tells of the 12 spies going into the land of Israel. Only 2 come back unscathed. The other 10, it seems, get themselves into a lot of trouble. I want to turn to the very, very end of Shlach Lecha, which is the source for the 3rd paragraph of the reading of the Shema, the commandment to wear tzitzit. And we read there, the Lord said to Moses as follows, speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages, right? Tzitzit or tzitziot in the plural. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them so that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I, the Lord, am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God. So I think this is a very, very poetic ending to this parsha that begins with the spies. And the reason that I say that is because in the Hebrew, we just read, V'lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zonim achareihem. That you shall not, we just find here, you shall not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. And that's precisely what 10 of the 12 spies do when they come into the land of Israel. Right? They follow this sense of looking for only the negative in the land of Israel and not for the positive. And they accomplish that, right? All they see are the impediments, the obstacles to the Israelites conquering the land of Israel. And unfortunately, they get the rest of Bnei Israel, the rest of the children of Israel, very, very anxious about the prospects of coming in and conquering the land. Caleb, however, is different, as I pointed out last week. And I want to remind you of this very, very beautiful verse that sparks a fascinating midrash. This is chapter 13, verse 22, where it's telling of the expedition into the land of Israel. And it says, Vaya'alu v'negev, that they went up into the Negev, Vayavo ad Hebron, and he went to Hebron. Vayavo, interestingly enough, is in the singular. The verse opens in the plural, but then all of a sudden switches to the singular, and that ends up sparking this wonderful midrash that it refers to Caleb, right? Caleb. What did Caleb do when he entered the land of Israel? He saw himself as a pilgrim. And instead of searching around for empirical facts like the rest of the spies, he heads off to Hebron, to the burial place of our ancestors, and seeks to connect with our history, with our ancestors. What is that telling us? That's telling us that he didn't simply judge with his eyes, right, and with this evil inclination of his heart. He felt it was more important to connect with the big picture, that entering the land of Israel is about divine promise. It's about our history, it's about our people. Caleb was able to see that in a very, very critical moment in Torah. And that's what makes him a hero. That's what makes him a hero, along with Yoshua ben Nun. So a very, very important lesson to be learned from this week's Parashah. And I think that's a very, very beautiful notion to keep in mind, especially every time we read the third paragraph of the Shema. Lo taturu acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem asher atem zolim achareihem, that you shall not wander after the lust of your heart or your eyes, but rather reflect deeply. And in moments like this, right, search within your heart and rise to the occasion. Be a mensch like Caleb did. So with that, let's jump into the third and very, very juicy chapter of Megillat Ruth. I hope you had great fun reading this, delving into this racy chapter. We call this the transformative midnight encounter between Ruth and Boaz. And once again, this chapter, just like the second chapter, opens with Naomi and Ruth home alone. There's been a lot of action up until this point, but what's so striking is that the women's fundamental circumstances remain the same, right? We might think there's been some radical transformation. We might think that there's a lineup of people waiting outside of their door to give them food. It's simply not the case, right? They are still alone. They are still in their existential loneliness in the town of Beit Lechem. The chapter itself is divided into three parts. The first part is Naomi's daring plan for desperate times, right? Desperate times require desperate measures, and we're going to see that in a moment in verses 1 through 5. The second section is Ruth and Boaz on the threshing floor, verses 6 through 15. And then the final section of chapter 3 is the homecoming with good news and grain that takes places between verses 16 and 18. The chapter itself is quite ambiguous. It's provocative with serious sexual overtones. So without further ado, I know you're all on the edge of your seat now. Okay, let's turn to the beginning of chapter 3. What I want you to notice at the very, very beginning of chapter 3 in comparison to chapter 2 is that here it's Naomi who is proactive, right? She is going to move the action in this chapter along, right? She is the initiator of all of the action at the beginning of this chapter, just like Ruth initiated all of the action at the beginning of the second chapter. And then when we get to the final chapter, you'll see who it is that initiates all of that action. So we see this transition of Naomi moving from a victim of calamity to a shaper of destiny. Okay, she is taking control at this moment. Let's take a look at that opening paragraph and we read together. What I want you to think about as I read this opening paragraph is, what is it that Naomi says? What are her instructions to Ruth? And what is her motivation? Okay, let's read. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "Daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Now there is our kinsman Boaz, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do." She replied, that is, Ruth replied to Naomi, "I will do everything you tell me." So how are we to understand these cryptic instructions of Naomi? What does Naomi want in all of this? What is her motivation? Whose welfare is she out for? Is she concerned with? Who'd like to jump into the fray?
I think we have to take it as it says. She wants Ruth to find a husband who'll take care of her, make her happy. And she thinks that one of the relatives, Boaz, is the right kind of person for her. What this business about anointing yourself and all of that leads to a lot of question.
Very, very good start, Ed. Okay, Ed, it reflects your sweet neshama that you want to give Naomi the benefit of the doubt here. Okay,
Yeah.
and certainly if we take her words at face value, where she says to Ruth, "Biti halo evakesh lach manoach asher yitad la," right? She calls Ruth my daughter and says very, very clearly, "I want to seek a resting place for you," right? Literally manoach, resting place. Here you see in the English it's translated as a home for you. In other words, right, I want you to settle down with a man. I want you to be protected in this foreign city, in Beit Lechem, which is a foreign city to you. So if we take those words at face value, like Ged did, then it seems that she's looking out first and foremost for Ruth's welfare. But is something else going on here under the surface? And Ed began touching on it. Carolyn?
Harold and then Steve.
Thank you. I think that Naomi is also looking out for herself. There's been a bond created between the two women from the moment that Ruth said, "Your people will be my people." Now it's payback time. So if she has a good home, Naomi's going to be part of that good home. So she's looking out for herself also.
Very good. So perhaps, Harold, she's being a little self-serving and somewhat disingenuous. Possibly. Beatrice, you're cringing there.
This is like saying that if a parent wants something good for their child, it's like it's either or. It can be both.
Right. Okay, very good, Steve. Okay, very, very good. That's very rabbinic of you. Okay. Why does it have to be an either or choice? Okay. It doesn't have to be that either Naomi is self-serving and disingenuous, or she's solely concerned about Ruth's welfare. We don't need to choose between these two extremes, right? It could very, very well be that Naomi is seeking to improve Ruth's lot, and she anticipates it's going to benefit her too. Okay, she can have both at the same time.
If you show me a divergence, one benefits and one to the detriment of another, I'd be more of a believer.
Right. Okay. No. This is very much symbiotic. Okay.
Okay.
Nonetheless, I think there's a bit of a sultry push that's going on here. Okay. Carolyn, is it anyone else want to voice their opinion?
Linda, did you want to just unmute yourself? And then Daniel.
I didn't have anything to share. I'm just listening.
Okay. Daniel?
So after chapter 1 and chapter 2, Ruth, is doing all of this action without any thanks or physical thanks from Naomi. Naomi doesn't really acknowledge her in both cases, when she's decided to go with her and when she did all this work to bring food back to her. And then all of a sudden now, and Naomi was always focused on herself. It's like, I've got nothing, I come back with nothing, etc. And now all of a sudden, as you started talking, Naomi is now acting. So maybe it's a change in her position. So now she's no longer thinking solely of herself and herself. She sees other people. It's like, I have blinders on, I'm in grief, I'm so destitute, and all I can think about is me and my lot. And now all of a sudden she's opening up and seeing how, whether for her own benefit or Ruth's benefit, she's starting to see other people and how other people in the world are. And then the other thing is, she doesn't even ask Ruth how she feels about it, and Ruth goes along with it. And then Ruth, at the end of which says, "I'll do what you tell me." But then, Ruth also, has seen Boaz, so maybe if she was objecting to the fact that she's trying to, make this arrangement, she could have said something. But then Ruth decides to, is in agreement, even though, without, because she's already, it's not like she's being set up with someone she knows nothing about or has never seen.
Very good, Daniel. So first of all, I love the observation that you're making here, is that Naomi is opening up a bit, right? She's crawling out from under this rock of grief, right? From this paralysis that she's been under ever since losing both of her sons and husband. And she's opening up to the point where she's realizing that now that Ruth has taken care of me, it's time for me to take care of her, right? I very much appreciate, all of the kolot, all of the voices that have been heard in the Beit Midrash in terms of how it is that we understand the motivation of Naomi in this. And ultimately, I think, Steve is right on the mark here in the sense that it doesn't have to be either extreme here, right? We can, both understand that Naomi is looking out for Ruth's best interests, and she also knows that she's going to benefit and benefit well from all of this, too. You notice this whole business of going to the threshing floor, okay? What was it to winnow barley on the threshing floor? I want to read to you from the commentary of JPS, Jewish Publication Society, which explains what it is that went on the threshing floor. It says, in ancient Israel, harvested and bound sheaves of grain were carried by hand or cart to a large flat area where the grain was pounded on the ground. Okay, we call this threshing, and it was pounded to loosen the kernels from their hard husks and other chaff. Then, as the prevailing winds of late afternoon came up, the threshers winnowed the threshed grain by throwing it upward. They collected the heavier grain kernels, which fell to the ground. The chaff, being lighter, was carried downwind, right? And then the threshing floor, some of the realia of this, it was a large, flat, outdoor space where many farmers and farmhands would gather together at the end of the harvest to perform the seasonal task of processing harvested sheaves into usable grain berries. A large communal facility, a threshing floor tended to be located outside of town. And indeed, not only outside of town, you remember some of the images that we saw of the gates of the city. So the threshing floor was typically just outside of the gates of the city, right? That's where it would be found. Okay, so that's some of the reality. I also want to share with you, Judith Cates, in her book entitled Reading Ruth, writes a very, very beautiful piece about what it is that Naomi is proposing to Ruth and the risk that Ruth is undertaking in all of this. Here's what she says. It would be hard to overestimate just how daring and risky a scheme it is. Ruth is already vulnerable, a woman alone, a foreigner with no man obligated to protect her. Naomi proposes to startle Boaz into remembering his connections to her family by placing Ruth in a situation of even greater vulnerability. She is to risk her reputation and the tolerance of the community by going to him secretly at night. Ruth is not just a foreigner, but a member of a people despised and considered dangerous because of their sexual depravity. Israel's contempt for Moabites is embodied most fully, after all, in the story inscribed in Genesis 19 of Moab's origins in the incestuous intercourse of Lot and his daughters. Naomi proposes that Ruth, the Moabite woman, deliberately cast herself in the role of seductress, making herself sexually attractive and hoping that Boaz's response will continue to be one of kindness and generosity. Perhaps to minimize the potential scandal, Naomi instructs Ruth to take initiative only to the point of attracting his attention. Then she prescribes the conventional submissive female role, waiting for him to tell her what to do. The text heightens the drama and deepens our understanding of Ruth's character. Not only that, Frederick Bush, in his commentary, right, spells it out even more clearly. And writes that the course of action outlined by Naomi entails the greatest risks to both her reputation and her person. True both in his characterization of Boaz when he introduced him to us in chapter 2 and in recording Boaz's actions and words throughout chapter 2, the narrator has signaled to us that Boaz is a generous and kind man of integrity who is faithful to his responsibilities. Nevertheless, the course of action outlined by Naomi could result in severe damage to Ruth. Number one, since Ruth has not contracted a new marriage, she is still the wife of Machlon. So Boaz could charge her with failing in her family responsibilities and possibly even brand her an adulteress. Two, he could use the night's opportunity for his sexual pleasure and then with male bravado malign her character and perhaps even charge her with prostitution. Three, he could deride her request for marriage to him, the wealthy and powerful landowner, as delusions of grandeur. Yet Ruth raises neither question nor objection, but simply responds, "All that you say, I will do." What does that remind you of, by the way, that response? I will do everything you tell me. Just as she says to Naomi as she's about to go out to the threshing floor. Alice? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Like when God was offering the 10 Commandments, then Israel was a group that said, I will say and I will do, without even waiting to get all the instructions.
Excellent, excellent. So we have these moments in this chapter of Na'aseh v'nishma, right? I will do everything that you tell me to do. So Ruth is saying this very, very clearly to Naomi, hook, line, and sinker. She is going to follow the instructions very, very clearly. Okay, let's see how she does now. Okay, we continue from verse 6.
I think Beatrice has a question.
Is this the same case as with Abraham?
Tell me what you're thinking of, Beatrice.
When God tells him to go, Lech Lecha, and he says, I will do as you say.
Right, it's in the sense of hineni, right? Behold, here I am, right? Which we hear Abraham say, he follows the instructions of Lech Lecha very, very carefully in Genesis 12, right? And then again, when God says to him, Kachna et bincha et yichidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak, take your son, your only son, the one you love, right? And God calls out, right, Avraham answers, Hineni, here I am. So yes, there's definitely a similarity there. It's, there's a sense of wholeness in fulfilling the words of what is being asked of you, right? So Abraham does that with God, and Ruth is clearly doing that with Naomi. And then we're going to see a very, very similar response coming from Boaz. Okay, verse 6.
Actually,
Yes.
we have another question from Arvin.
I'm in trouble.
Matt, your previous critique referred to a possible act of prostitution or adultery. Now, Machlon is dead. So where's the prostitution and the adultery?
Yes, Machlon is dead. However, she has potential obligations that need to be fulfilled before moving on. So, the concern here is, all of this seems, a bit shady right now in terms of what Naomi is asking her to do. And look, Boaz could make false accusations against her. Now, this was Frederick Bush's commentary on all of this, right? What he's doing he's just accentuating the great risk that Ruth is carrying by, going along with what Naomi is proposing here. Who knows? It's a big question mark at the very, very beginning of this chapter. We're going to see how all of this plays out, and thankfully it's going to play out, Arvin, with a happy ending. Okay? Stay tuned. So from verse 6, she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at his feet. Okay, so first of all, what is this business of lying down beside the grain pile? What is that telling us? So Frederick Bush, who I quoted before, tells us what the significance of this location is, the grain pile, and says the following. It's a minor detail, yet important for the execution of the plan. The phrase suggests an area separate from the other sleepers and accessible to the waiting woman. Is this detail another hint of that blessed chance which aids these women in their struggles for life? Earlier, Ruth happened to come to the field of Boaz. Does Boaz happen now to lie at the corner of the threshing floor? We cannot be sure. Okay, so it's one detail, very, very significant here. And I love what Frederick Bush is pointing out. And in addition, notice that it tells us in verse 8, in the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. Look at how that verse opens in the Hebrew, Vayehi b'chatzi halayla. Is that familiar to any of you when you hear those words, Vayehi b'chatzi halayla? What comes to mind?
Jacob at the stone where he is awakened by the man.
And think of a ritual a very, very important ritual that we do, like the Passover Seder. Right? It's a song that we sing.
I was saying Passover. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, right. Passover Seder, very, very famous song that we sing by Yehi b'chatzi halayla, that it came to pass in the middle of the night. Right? That the middle of the night is a liminal moment, right? That it's potentially a moment of great blessing, right, or great curse, right? And here, right, this is going to be a moment that, right, moves all of the action along in the right direction. Okay, so the man gives a start. Look what it says in the Hebrew. Vayecherad ha'ish. The man trembled. Again, in the English, it says he gave a start. I told you every English commentary, every translation is a commentary. In the Hebrew, it says the man trembled. You'll notice that we have the word for charedim. This is where the ultra-Orthodox take their name from, right? The notion of trembling before God, right? It latches onto this quality of fear, right? Living in fear of God, in fear of in the presence of God. So why is it that Boaz trembles? What frightens him? What do you think frightens him?
He didn't know what it was. Could have been an animal.
Right. Okay, so it could have been an animal, or worse yet, so
It could be an enemy.
very good, very good. It could be an enemy, right? So returning to the JPS commentary, listen to what it says here. The following, perhaps we are to suppose that Boaz does not recognize Ruth because it is dark and he is startled, or perhaps because she is so transformed in her new garb that he cannot tell she is the woman he previously met in the field. The Midrash suggests that Boaz may not realize that this night visitor is human. Ruth Rabbah and later Rashi explain that Boaz fears it is a female demon. Such figures appear in ancient Near Eastern sources. One of these is Lilith, whose very name is evoked by the night, Lila. You hear the similarity, Lilith, Lila. Ruth Zuta imagines him saying, if you are a spirit, go away, and if you are human, let me know. Ruth Rabbah takes Vayilafet, he pulled back, to mean that Ruth clings to him so that he feels her hair and reminds himself that spirits have no hair. He then asks, who are you, a spirit or a woman? When she answers a woman, he says, a free woman or a married woman. And she answers free. Finally, he asks, ritually pure or impure, pure. Only then does she tell him who she is. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that this is a moment of great trembling. And then, of course, we have this whole business with the expression of uncovering one's feet. It seems that this is a euphemism for sex, or the beginning of sex, the beginning of sexual relations. What is very, very interesting in that is the same commentator, Frederick Bush, writes the following. He looks back at when we first read of this notion of uncovering the feet in verse 4. When Naomi instructs Ruth, when he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over it and uncover his feet and lie down. And here's what Frederick Bush says. He says, even though it is scarcely probable that the word miraglotav, his legs, is functioning here as a euphemism for sexual organs, it is nonetheless clear that the word is intentionally ambiguous, leaving it quite uncertain how much of the lower half of Boaz's body is to be uncovered. Second, the use of the verb gila, which is uncover, governing a noun for the region of the legs, could hardly fail to bring to mind at least two idioms. First, the use of the expression to uncover the skirt of the father's robe in the book of Deuteronomy, and number two, the similar expression to uncover the nakedness, both of which are euphemisms for sexual intercourse. So essentially, what it is that Frederick Bush writes here is he quotes another commentator, Campbell, and says, in this light, Campbell is indeed correct when he observes that it is quite incomprehensible that a Hebrew storyteller could use such terms all in the same context and not suggest to his audience that a sexually provocative set of circumstances confronts them. Okay, in other words, what's happening is the narrator is taking us to the edge, right? Really to, this is a cliffhanger, right? We all expect a certain action to happen, right? It's getting hot and heavy, and we seem to be headed in a particular direction. And then the narrator is slowly pulling us back, right? We're not going there. Okay, so watch step by step as this plays out. Boaz says in verse 9, "Who are you?" he asked. And she replied, "I am your handmaid, Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman." Okay, a whole lot to unpack there. Okay, so when she calls herself a handmaid, right, JPS explains to us the term is one of two that designates a subordinate woman, usually a servant. The other term being shivcha. In a number of non-legal texts, ama is interchangeable with shivcha, maidservant. To call oneself a maidservant was a woman's normal way of expressing proper deference to a social superior. Okay, so that's one. Right, then she says, "Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman." At this point, Ruth no longer follows Naomi's directives. She has been instructed to have Boaz tell her what to do. Instead, it seems that she, Ruth, is taking charge and is telling Boaz what he should do. The nature of Ruth's request is the puzzle at the heart of the book, and also a key to the interpretation of this book. Okay, so when one translates the noun as, right, spread your robe over your handmaid, ufarasta knafecha. Okay, it's translated here as robe, but it's also, we know, the Hebrew for wings. And in the JPS commentary, it says when one translates the noun as wings, then Ruth is expressly echoing Boaz's earlier blessing of Ruth in chapter 2, verse 12. "May you have full recompense from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings, Kenaphayim, you have sought refuge." Ruth thus urges Boaz to undertake the protective role that he has ascribed to God. So last week when we met, we were talking a bit about this notion of redeemer. How are we to understand this business? When we call Boaz a redeemer, what does that mean, that he's a redeemer? How do we understand this notion? Anyone have any idea of what it is to be a goel, according to the traditional understanding?
Linda Fain? And Jerry? Hold on, you're muted, Linda.
Sorry, I don't know if it's the traditional understanding, but in my understanding, if he's going to be her redeemer, to me, it would mean that he is redeeming her value. He's redeeming her reputation. And he's redeeming her life.
So, you're right, Linda. It's not the traditional understanding, but I like your interpretation more. Okay, yours is a poetic midrashic understanding, right? And that's ultimately what he does, right? He's going to redeem her position. He's going to redeem her position in the family, and certainly in Israelite society. Okay.
Jerry, then Ed.
I think the traditional notion is that they will produce children, offspring, to carry on the line of her dead husband, and so that's what all this is sort of about, being the redeeming kinsman. And I guess one question is whether, when we were talking earlier about the motives of Naomi, whether that was also a potential motive of her from the beginning, that she mentioned being a redeemer, and the concept has always been not only to take care of her material needs, but also to carry on and produce another generation.
Good. Okay, so very good. The connection that you're making here, Gerald, is one of connecting the Goel to the Levir, right? The Levirate marriage, right? That,
Yes.
Perhaps that's how he's going to function as Redeemer. There are actually three very, very specific responsibilities of a Redeemer according to Torah.
Matt, a question. Is the word redeem in Hebrew the one that's used where you have to have an obligation to redeem captives of your people? People have been captured in warfare and you have to redeem them. Is it the same word?
Right, so not the same word. So you're thinking of Pidyon Shvui, right? Redeeming captives. Okay, this is different. And this is used, Ed, in the sense, there are three possible senses, three traditional senses that Torah talks about. One is in terms of blood vengeance, right? If a relative of yours is killed, right, you can go after the murderer, right? So you can be a goel dam in that sense, okay? Another way of using it is helping those who are destitute as a result of financial ruin, right? And the third way of understanding it is helping the destitute come out of slavery. Okay, so it's very, very interesting because God is regarded as the redeemer, the goel of, right, the Israelites when they come out of Egypt, in that sense of taking the people out of slavery. It's not at all clear that any of these traditional understandings of goel applies to the case at hand that we're talking about. It does apply in the sense of helping these destitute kinsmen, these destitute family members, right, come out of a state of, of poverty, of both poverty and mourning. So that would be the way that we would understand it. From what I've scoured of biblical commentaries, it seems that it's a more general understanding of goel rather than a very, very specific traditional understanding. He's going to act as redeemer, but it's acting as a redeemer in the sense of being the protector of a poor relative. And that's the simple way that we need to understand goel here. So Boaz exclaims, this is verse 10, "Be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do in your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true that I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night. Then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as a redeemer for you, I will do so myself. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning." Okay, unpacking this. First of all, when Boaz says, your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, my question to you, of course, is, what is Ruth's first deed of chesed? What is her first deed of loyalty that Boaz is thinking of?
Staying with Naomi.
Okay, Daniel, you're saying it's the fact that she attaches herself to Naomi. Okay, is it possible that there is an earlier moment of chesed that Ruth performs? Someone else? Okay, definitely the fact that she goes back to Bethlehem with Naomi, it is an act of chesed. There's no question about that. Okay, but we certainly read of another act of chesed that she does before that. Where do we see it? Remember in verse 8, chapter 1, Naomi says the following to her daughters-in-law. Turn back each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Lechna shovna isha levet ima, yas Adonai imachem, chesed kasher asitem im hametim be'imadi. Right? May God do kindness to you just as you have done kindness with your dead husbands. Right? What is the ultimate act of chesed that we do in Jewish tradition? It's burial. That's the ultimate act, and that's what we call chesed shel emet, loving kindness of truth, because that's a loving kindness that cannot be repaid. Okay, so there are a number of candidates here for what it is that Boaz is talking about. It's the possibility of the fact that she accompanies Naomi back to Beit Lechem. That's number one. Number two, it's the possibility of the chesed that she's done with the dead. Give me another candidate. What was another act of chesed that Ruth did?
She put her life on the line. To do
How
this.
so, Steve?
Well, as you explained earlier, she's at risk.
Yes.
Just put herself at risk.
Right. Okay. In this chapter, she's putting her life on the line. Good. Okay. And what about what happened in chapter 2? Major act of chesed that Ruth does for Naomi.
In chapter 2, it says when she is introduced to Boaz, he says, "I've been told of all that you did for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother, the land of your birth, and came to a people known before you." I mean, so that's what he knew. But then also what you're just asking for is, the fact that she's bringing her food to eat and gleaning in the fields. Basically everything Ruth does is good deeds. That's all I can
Said it. Okay. The fact that she's bringing back food to eat for Naomi. Okay. That is a major act of chesed that we can add to our list, right? She brings back 21 quarts of barley. And in addition to that, she brings back the leftovers, remember. She brown bags the leftovers from her lunch and she brings it back to Naomi. Okay, so there are a lot of possibilities here. Right, but notice,
how does Boaz have any clue about anything that she's done in her absence? In his
how does
absence.
Boaz, wait, say it again, Arvin, you cut out for a moment.
To say that greater than the first act of loyalty. So
Good.
we cited several. Number one, we said buried Machlon. Well, he wasn't there, so he doesn't know whether or not she did or didn't bury him. Secondly, we say that, so he remained with Naomi. So are we to assume that he knows the whole story about the discussion, leave me? She says, I'm staying with you. I mean, that's a pretty big leap of faith, or at least some of the facts are not there to support what he knows about her, other than the fact that she came to his field earlier, she gleaned, and then she's come back at night.
So in answer to your question, Arvin, you're right. You're right in the sense that we don't see anything explicit in the story that would give us the sense that Boaz has been told directly about her acts of chesed. However, here's what we do have. Okay, in verse 19, chapter 1, it says that when Ruth and Naomi come back to Beit Lechem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. Okay, meaning, Vatehom kol ha'ir, it was buzzing, the hadavar noda, right? The word was out that Naomi returned with this Moabite woman. Then when Ruth appears in Boaz's field, and Boaz comes back to the field and asks his reapers in chapter 2, verse 6, right, whose girl is that? The servant replies, she is a Moabite girl who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean here, gather among the sheaves behind the reapers. She has been here on her feet, da-da-da-da-da. So there's a sense that people are aware in Beit Lechem that Ruth was the one who came back with Naomi. And also Boaz knows well that, she's at least done she's at least brought a serious amount of food back to her mother-in-law. So that's why I say that could very well be the chesed that Boaz is thinking of. But it could be that Boaz heard about what she did for Machlon and the fact that she accompanies. So there's no explicit sense that he hears directly, but all around us, it seems that, it's been out there on Twitter and people in Beit Lechem know about it.
So when he says here in the English, your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, because you haven't turned to a younger or a richer or poorer man. Is he saying that the loyalty that she showed is the loyalty to Naomi?
Maybe not just to Naomi, but maybe what he's accentuating here is familial loyalty, right? The fact that she could have gone out, right, and, grabbed somebody, at least the same age as her, maybe even a little younger. And what does she end up doing? She ends up connecting with a guy who is significantly older than her. Most likely Boaz is about Naomi's age, right? He is far from Ruth's age, okay? That is the sense that the text is giving us here. So I believe the loyalty that he's talking about is a familial loyalty that, is even greater in his mind than, all of the other acts of chesed that she's done up until this point, right? Moving on here, he says, daughter, have no fear. I will do on your behalf whatever you ask. Okay, so when he says that, I'll do whatever you want, it sounds very, very similar to Ruth's response to Naomi that we saw earlier in the chapter. When Ruth says to Naomi, I will do everything you tell me to do, and now Boaz is saying the same thing to Ruth. Whatever you need, I am going to take care of. Right? And again, there's this allusion to the fact that everyone in the town knows what a fine person she is. Okay? She's referred to as Eshet Chayalat, right? They know that she's a woman of valor. And then here at this point, he discloses the fact that he knows of another kinsman who's actually closer in line than he is, that has the ability to redeem her. And he's the one that needs to be approached first. So
Daniel has a question.
Sure.
No, it was sort of a, so this section, and just before it, where it talks about, Naomi, telling her how to approach Boaz and all that, and all the vagueness of it, the question is, how important is that, in the sense, depending on how much, as the reader knows, let's say somebody with, let's say somebody younger in life who doesn't know as much about relationships and things like that can just read it, the words, and says, oh, just have a visual image of her just putting herself at the feet of Boaz, etc. Whereas you could read into it and it says maybe she actually was more seductive, and maybe why he was trembling was because she was doing stuff to him, and maybe because he felt compromised, or you could take it in all different directions. And then I started thinking, how important is it? Does it really even matter in the scope of things, that aspect of the story, to sort of like the message is trying to portray, because it kind of sort of mucks things up, because you can look at it and say, if it's as explicit as it could be, Naomi was really thoughtless then, as some of the commentary you said, by putting Ruth in such a precarious position. And Ruth, being as saintly as she is, doing all these things, never being thanked, never being recognized, still is willing to do what this person's asking her, no questions asked.
So Daniel, it seems to me that you're delicately dancing around the import of this highly charged dynamic between the two of them. Okay, so what is my takeaway from all of this? What do I read into it? Like I said before, it all seems to be going in particular this power dynamic, between the two of them, where Boaz can take advantage of his stature, and status, at this point, and have his way with her as he wants, but he doesn't. And I leave open, I don't want to discount what you're saying in terms of Ruth being a seductress. Maybe she's, looking to, have a little action that night as well. But neither of them goes there. And what's so fascinating about all of this is that the word that repeats itself over and over and over again, especially at this point, the last paragraph we just read, is goel. Goel, yigalech, yigal, right? So the conversation isn't about sex, right? It's not about anything untoward. It's entirely about redemption. That is the thing on their minds. It's a redeemer. Who is going to protect Ruth, right? That's Boaz's concern here. And what it ends up doing is it pushes both of their stock prices higher, morally and ethically, right? That they don't, cross a line. That's what's happening here. So I believe that's the significance of what we're seeing here. Now, they also both know they're in a very, very compromising position. And it's one of the reasons that Boaz at this point is telling Ruth, or commanding her, lie down until morning. Okay? JPS commentary relates to us. In a scene already erotically charged with sexual possibilities, the choice of this Hebrew word is inescapably suggestive. Yet the context favors the prevailing plain sense interpretation. That is, that Boaz is simply inviting Ruth to lie on the ground. For up until now, Ruth and Boaz have pointedly confined their conversation to matters of redemption. And Boaz's enthusiastic response has assured the reader as much as Ruth that he will act honorably on her behalf. Okay, so we move on. Verse 14. So she lay at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, that is, Boaz thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And he said, hold out the shawl you are wearing. She held it while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. Okay, so how do we interpret this? What is the Rashi on this? Why is Boaz doing this? Why is he telling Ruth, spread out your skirt and I'm going to spread out your shawl and I'll pour barley into it? Right, JPS commentary. Yeah, Carolyn?
Yeah, Matt Weiss.
Is it to make it look like she was there for a different reason?
Very good, Matt. There we go. You were channeling the great JPS Torah commentary. Precisely. Okay, it's to protect her, and it's also to protect Boaz. It's to give both of them cover. Because if she comes back with a load of food in her shawl, people aren't going to question that. She was simply out procuring food, right? JPS reads, this statement indicates that Ruth's visit was compromising and needed to be kept private. Boaz is motivated by the wish to protect Ruth's respectability as an Eshet Chayil and perhaps his own as well. Whereas Boaz's thinking reflects his solicitude for Ruth, the comment also serves to highlight the risky nature of this nocturnal visit for Ruth's position within society. Hubbard writes, quote, one can easily imagine what impression their meeting would create among the Bethlehemites. An old man victimized by a seductive Moabitess, a clandestine lover's tryst, a conspiracy to get around the law. The repercussions could be catastrophic. It could be devastating for both of them. So giving her 6 measures of barley is going to give both of them the cover that they need, right, to keep this encounter secret. She gets back to town and she comes to her mother-in-law, who asks, how is it with you, daughter? Okay, very interestingly enough, again, you've got to look at the Hebrew to see this. Literally, what's being asked, what Naomi asks her, mi at biti, who are you, my daughter? It's as if she's existentially asking, how have you changed from this encounter that you had? She told her all that the man had done for her. And she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Okay? What are we to make of Ruth's description of what happened here? He gave me 6 measures of barley, which Boaz indeed did, but what about the next part?
Yeah, she added that. Don't go empty-handed, because you never said that.
Right, very good, Daniel. Okay. Why did she add it? Why was that necessary?
Arvin?
Because that could be taken as some type of reward for some type of illicit conduct.
Very interesting, Arvin. Not what I was thinking of, far deeper than what I was thinking. Right.
Matt, may I ask you to go back one group of Sukkim?
Yeah.
Who's the mysterious redeemer that's hanging around?
So in chapter 4, that is when we'll understand who this mysterious redeemer is. What's striking in all of this, Arvin, is that this is the first that we're learning of this other kinsman here, right? And the other question is, why hasn't this other kinsman come forth and help take care of Ruth and Naomi on their return to Bethlehem? So it's still very, very mysterious, right? It begins to unravel. The mystery of this begins to unravel in chapter 4. But you're right to point that out. I mean, we just don't have a clue.
Linda and Matt?
I was going back to what your original question was, which was why did Ruth add that extra, he said don't go back empty-handed. And I was thinking it was to make Naomi feel that she had been included in the discussion.
Excellent, Linda. Good. Ruth, wants Naomi to know that she is being taken care of every step of the way. She's very much attuned to Naomi's feelings, and she wants Naomi to know that she's surrounded by love. And the love is not only coming from Ruth, who is the character that is, remember, Ruth, Kosira Vaya, overflowing, that Ruth is the one that's overflowing with loving kindness. But in addition, right, she wants to transform Boaz into that type of character as well. It's not to say that Boaz doesn't deserve that, but she's telling a bit of a white lie in order to convey the message to Naomi that she is indeed surrounded by love here, right? It's not terrible. Trust me, I'm not saying that, it's terrible by any means what she does, but, she's, she's very, very much aware of the need to, to surround her with love, to cushion her. It's also interesting that in the Hebrew, Al tavoi rekam, right? Boaz says to her, do not go back empty-handed. The Hebrew is rekam. You remember, we heard that word rek, empty, when Naomi first comes back to Bethlehem. Remember what she says? I left Bethlehem full. Right? Ani milea halachti. Right? I left Bethlehem full, and now I'm coming back empty. And she uses that same word, rek. Okay, so this ends up becoming bookends in a way to the story. And Ruth is clearly saying to her mother-in-law, you are no longer empty, right? You are filled not only with food, right? But also there is this great love that you're experiencing all around you. You just have to open your eyes and see it. Other comment or question?
Matt?
Going back to what Arvin said about the Redeemer, when Boaz mentions that there's somebody else, it shows that he's been thinking about this already, probably. He's done some research and because he knew there was somebody else, closer relative.
It might be conveying to us the message, Matt, that he's quite motivated here.
Yeah.
Right? Boaz knows what he wants. However, he's not going to be a runaway train. He's going to do it properly.
Right.
Right. He's going to do it, al pia halacha, al pia Torah. He's doing it according to the law here, and he's doing it honestly. So
but before she even came, I think he researched that fact.
Right. Very good. Very good.
Jerry?
Yeah, I have the concept of being the closer relative as being the one who has a priority right to be the redeemer. Where exactly, I'm trying to understand what that is, what the nature of that relationship would be that would make him closer. And then why wouldn't Naomi have known that herself? I mean, Naomi would have known if there was someone closer. And why did she select Boaz?
Right. So good, Jerry. Maybe she knew that there was something untoward about, or something shady about this closer kinsman. Okay, that he's not quite as upstanding as Boaz, or maybe he's not as much of a person of means. Now, when we get to chapter 4, you'll have some insight into the character of this person. You'll get more of a sense of the character of this person. And I think that gives us a clue as to why it is that Naomi does not tell Ruth to go to this guy. Okay? I don't want to spill the beans on that one yet. I don't want to get to the punchline yet. Okay, so you'll have to wait a week. But, for good reason, it seems she doesn't tell Ruth to go to this other person. Okay, so let the mystery stand.
As luck would have it.
As luck would have it, indeed. Yes. Okay, so
Matt,
two more pieces.
We still haven't resolved whether Naomi was truly telling Ruth to offer herself sexually to Boaz?
And you know what, Ed? Ultimately, that's going to remain a question. You know, I believe what she wanted of Ruth was simply to be attractive in the moment. She felt that that's what was needed. And she perhaps felt that was the way to Boaz's heart. You know, she thought she was doing, ultimately a great bracha for her daughter-in-law. But at the end of the day, Ed, you're right. The question stands. What was she? What was the intent of all this to push her daughter-in-law into a very, very uncompromising position? Or was it something more benign? Ultimately we don't know. Thankfully, both of them are upstanding people, and they don't take it to that point. Ed, I can't hear you. You've got to take yourself off mute.
The author of the story knows certainly Hebrew well enough to know what all the double entendres could be.
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
So why would the authors deliberately set up a situation that could put both Naomi and Ruth and Boaz all in this compromised position?
Why? Because that's precisely for that reason. Because what they do is they take us to the edge of the cliff, and it ends up raising the stock prices of Boaz and Ruth in all of this, right? Because we expect that one thing is going to happen. We expect that A is going to happen. Something. It could be something terrible. It could be it could be a one-night stand. It could be something terrible. We don't know what's going to happen. Okay, but we expect one thing, and then at the last minute, it shifts entirely. And there's all this talk of redemption. There's all this talk of Eshet Chayil, of being a woman of valor, a woman of valor. And they're morally and ethically upstanding people. So I believe that's what's going on here. That's why you have all this suggestive language, because ultimately it's showing us just the opposite.
Okay.
That's the device. That's the literary device that I believe the narrator is using here. Two final commentaries that I want to get to, and then I want to share with you.
Beatrice has a question, I think, if we have time. Beatrice has a question.
I don't see Naomi as putting Ruth in a compromising situation, because I think that what Naomi wants for Ruth is, like you said at the very beginning, is to get a man that would take care of her. And I'm quoting your words, take care of her, feed her, and make her happy. So I don't see her as putting her in any compromising situation.
What's potentially compromising here, Beatrice, is the fact that she's being told to do this in, a stealth sort of way in the middle of the night, that she's going to what's potentially a very unsafe environment, a threshing floor, and there are other laborers there. She's dressing up for this guy. She's anointing herself. So it's very, very suggestive, okay? I think Naomi could have gone about it in a different way. But maybe, it's just my modern sensibilities. And given the time that Naomi and Ruth were living in, this was the way you did that sort of thing, Beatrice.
Exactly.
And maybe you're right. That's right. And maybe that's the reason that we have to give her the benefit of the doubt in all of this. Okay? So the last two commentaries that I want to share with you, one from Frederick Bush and then a final piece from Catherine Hellerstein. Frederick Bush points out the following: this exchange between Ruth and Naomi comprises the last words that either of them will utter in the entire story. Poised on the threshold of fulfillment, they both step aside. The drama ceases to be their story and becomes the story about them. Boaz clearly now takes center stage, and the imminence of his action is indicated both by Naomi's assertion and by the fact that this act ends differently from the two preceding ones. Our narrator concluded the first act with a pointed allusion to the barley harvest, subtly suggesting the end of famine and emptiness. At the end of the second act, he brought all progress in the story to a halt by noting that when the harvest was over, Ruth still lived with her mother-in-law, signaling the return of famine and emptiness. But this act concludes with no such narrative statement. Our narrator leaves ringing in our ears only Naomi's supremely confident words that Boaz will not rest this day unless the matter is settled. Boaz's symbolic gift of grain indicated to Naomi that he would act, and by centering all attention on this gift and the reason for it in Ruth's report of the night's events, the narrator signals to us that this story now rushes irrevocably toward resolution. And here's the final piece, Catherine Hellerstein. She writes this very, very beautiful poem. It's entitled Ruth to Naomi After the Threshing. And she went down unto the threshing floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. Without understanding them, I followed your words, hiding in shadows of the granary, while threshers, men and boys, ate well and drank. They fell asleep on bales of hay, their sieves scattered across the piles of winnowed grain. As careless as the bawdy jokes and songs, they left off mid-verse, slipping into dreams. Stone walls absorbed their even breathing and fresh dust from beaten husks. I held my breath as Boaz, laughing, a little drunk, yawned and belched, then lay down by a heap of corn and slept. As you instructed, I came softly to that spot, uncovered his feet, their calloused heels, worn arches in repose, and curled up there. At midnight, he turned over, brushed his foot against my scarf, and suddenly sat up. Who are you? His words probed into the dark. To him, the rough-edged shadow, darkness on pure dark, not knowing why, I answered, Ruth, your handmaid, spread your skirt upon me. You are a near kinsman. His reply blessed me as daughter. He praised me for kindness shown to you, Naomi, and to him, old man, whose grace you asked through me. I never thought to follow after young men, rich or poor, or any man, since Machlon, for when I followed you, I found my way through grief. He called me daughter again, and virtuous. His beard tickled my ear. I shivered in the warmth of this man's breath as he explained your laws that let the nearer kinsmen of the dead be first to choose the widow and the lamb. I started to stand up. He told me, sleep, and just before dawn broke, helped me leave, unnoticed, as the moon slipped from the sky. Indigo turned violet, and the sun inched up to gild the rooftops, brilliant as the barley he poured in my heavy cape. You ask me, daughter, who are you? I'm filled with dreams. The chaff of widow falls away. Very, very beautifully said. I believe Catherine Hellerstein really gets into the shoes of Ruth, right, and helps us understand better the position that Ruth was put into in all of this. As we close, I want to share with you a snapshot from our GTS program in Israel. After all, it's very, very important to note that it is, at the end of the day, the Jewish Theological Seminary that brings us all together to learn in this virtual Beit Midrash. And I have so many of you in this Beit Midrash to thank for your connectedness, for your friendship, for your chesed, and for your generosity to the Jewish Theological Seminary. And that is an investment in the Jewish future in North America. So I want to share with you a snapshot of my life from this past year. The great privilege of having had 14 Jewish Theological Seminary rabbinical students, second-year rabbinical students, as part of the 5-year program that our students go through at JTS, 1 year is devoted to coming to Israel, to deepening their connection to the land, to the people, and of course, to the language. Right? We feel very, very strongly that as one of the pillars of Jewish tradition, our students need to feel deeply connected to this very, very special place, our homeland. And so they come here, and there are 3 core components to what we do here in Israel. The academic portion of the program, in which students are completely immersed in Talmud, in Halakha, in Jewish history, Jewish thought, philosophy, all of the traditional subjects that you can imagine. In addition, they study in an intensive ulpan with 2 marvelous teachers from the Hebrew University that come to Shokin and work with our students twice a week in intensive Hebrew to turn them into fluent Hebrew speakers by the end of the year. In addition, we have our experiential program, which gets them out of the walls of our Beit Midrash at the Shokin Library and into other parts of the country. We bring them to Tel Aviv, we bring them to Sderot. They spend 2 weeks at Kibbutz Hanaton in the north. We take them up to Haifa to learn about Arab-Jewish coexistence in Haifa. We want them to learn about social issues. We want them to be exposed to different expressions of Judaism in the land of Israel. So that's the goal of what we do in the experiential program. And then the final core component of what we do is a partnership with the Masorti movement, the conservative movement in Israel, where each of our students is assigned a community somewhere in the country outside of Jerusalem. The students are required to get to know that community. They perform rabbinic duties in that community. They work closely with the rabbi of that community. They have a rabbinic internship in that community. It deepens their connection. And oftentimes our students end up having a lifelong relationship with that community in Israel, to the extent that they end up partnering with that Israeli community, that conservative community, when they get out into whatever North American community that they end up calling home. Very, very specifically, the role that I had with our students in the spring semester, which I do every year, is I teach a course on Zionist thought and Israeli history. We take our students on a journey through classical Zionism. I want them to be fluent in the voices of the classical Zionist movement. I want them to know Jabotinsky, Herzl, Pinsker, Martin Buber, Achad Ha'am, right? All of the people that we think of as the visionaries of the modern state of Israel. And in addition to that, I want them to know their Israeli history back and forth. Part of the beauty of this year that JTS does in Israel is that we see an evolution of these students. We see a very, very emotional development of our students from the beginning of year to the end of the year. Our students arrive in Israel very, very tentative. And I say that in the sense of angst-ridden, both in terms of feeling like a persecuted minority in Israel. I know that all of you in this Beit Midrash know that it is not so easy to be a non-Orthodox Jew in the state of Israel today. Unfortunately, Israel does not value religious pluralism, Jewish religious pluralism, as we value it in the American Jewish community. That is something that Israeli Jews need to learn from diaspora Jews, and they need to learn it in a profound way. And that creates a lot of anxiety amongst our students, knowing full well that they're treated here as second-class citizens. In addition to that, of course, they come to a place that is filled with tension, anxiety, and great stress, given the political situation that we live through in this country. And so it is not an easy beginning to the year. The students wrestle over the course of the year, and right around the time that we get to February and March, our students begin to express a feeling of connectedness to this amazing place. By the end of the course that I teach, inevitably, the majority of students come up to me and they say, Rabbi Berkowitz, you turned me into a Zionist. It's one of the most gratifying things that I can hear out of the mouths of our students. Of course, the challenge and upset that we had this past spring semester was the Corona curveball that we had. And sadly, as soon as the State Department issued an advisory, the majority of our 14 rabbinical students left to Israel out of concern that they wouldn't be able to fly back to the States. They wouldn't be able to get flights back in a timely fashion. By the end of the semester, the end of the first week in May, we had about 3 students that were still in Israel. And I'm very, very happy to tell you that both we were able to have a Zoom celebration of the year with all of the students, even one student in California. So it was quite a challenge with all the time zones that we had to cover. So we had a beautiful celebration to the Israel year over Zoom. And in addition, for the students that remained, we were able to take them out on a hike. And we hiked in the Judean hills together for half a day and had a proper celebration like we do every year at the end of their Israel studies. So with that, I want to say Laila Tov from Israel. I want to wish you a great rest of the day where you are. I want to thank you for joining us. It's always such a treat to learn together and see all of these familiar faces. Carolyn, back to you.
And I want to thank you. Thank you very much, and Laila Tov.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Berkowitz, and all of you. You are among our greatest friends. We appreciate both your participation and support.
There's no sound.
Sorry about that. I want to thank you all again for your participation, your support. You are among our greatest friends. It is really wonderful to have you all here, even if it's on my computer screen, but I really love it. It's quite a picture. We are taping this. If you'd like to get the recording afterwards, just shoot me a quick note and I can send it out to you. We do have some people who have missed some sessions and we've sent out the recordings. We are back again next week at the same time. I'll send you out a note about that all too. Thank you very much.
Chapter 4, the final chapter of the book of Ruth.